Hello and welcome back to another video. This video is one that I wanted to make this video. I wasn't sure how I wanted to make it or what I wanted to do about it, but I've just finished reading Utopia Avenue by David Mitchell, and I had originally thought maybe I wanted to do like just a general David Mitchell overlook with this book in mind, but now I think it would be better probably to just do a review for this book. I've literally just finished it about half an hour ago, and funnily enough, it made me cry, which a David Mitchell book hasn't actually yet done to me before, I don't believe. No, I'm pretty sure, I don't think I have. And of all the ones I feel to have been able to do that, this would have been probably one of the least expected ones. So I'll give you a brief insight as to what the book is about, and then I think I'll talk about my thoughts on the book, and then I think I'm going to talk about some thoughts that I've just generally had whilst reading this book about perhaps the relationship between Mitchell and myself and his books with his other books and my experience of his books, I guess. We'll see. I haven't actually thought about anything. I've just kind of sat down, turned on the camera and started speaking. So the book itself is about a fictional band called Utopia Avenue during 1967 to 1968. It's a story that traces like their conception to the height of their career and then kind of the end of their career. So that's basically the overall premise of the entire book. And the structure of the book is that it is told in 3 parts, and each of those 3 parts also have like 2 parts within them. These 3 parts represent an album or an LP that Utopia Avenue released. And each of the 2 parts within a big part is like side A of the album and side B of the album. So then the chapters are the songs of the album. And then the perspective of the chapter is the artist in the band who had written that song. And then ultimately, at some point during that chapter, you kind of understand how that artist came to write that song whilst everything else in the background is going on. Now, in this band of 4, there are only 3 who are actual songwriters. So you do only really get 3 perspectives throughout. There's 2 chapters throughout the entire book, one which is a joint perspective because the song had been written by the drummer and the female artist. So that one you kind of then get the drummer's perspective, which you don't throughout the rest of the book. And then there's another chapter in which the lyricist was the manager of the band. So for that chapter, you also got his perspective. But they are the only 2 chapters in the book that kind of have those alternative perspectives. The main 3 perspectives are Jasper de Zoet, who you will recognise as a descendant of Jacob de Zoet from 1,000 Origins of Jacob de Zoet. There's also Elf Holloway. She's a sort of folk artist and she plays the piano, the keyboard, and also does the vocals. And then there is also Dean Moss, and he is like a rough and ready working class bassist. So with those 3 perspectives, Jasper's perspective follows him not only navigating the world with his autism, which isn't explicitly expressed, but it's a very obvious thing, and obviously David Mitchell has a close relationship with his son who's on the autistic spectrum and translating books from Japanese about the autistic spectrum. So Jasper is not only dealing with that navigation, and he is also a virtuoso in what he does, but he is also dealing with the sort of Mitchellian sci-fi / magical realist plotline, which you come to expect with David Mitchell's books. Elf's character is a middle-class character who kind of is dealing with being a woman within the industry, and she's also dealing with like the romantic subplots that go on, and a big part of that revolves around her having to come to terms with her sexuality throughout the book. And Dean's perspective is more about kind of transcending class barriers and breaking into this dream that you perhaps have always had, yet perhaps never felt you could achieve because of the way the class system sort of keeps you down, and then all of the implications that come with that. And his storyline probably is the most realistic in that it deals a lot with working class like family life and the troubles that can be dealt with in that. So ultimately, what you're actually getting in this book is one overarching narrative about the band and the band's rise to fame and the music industry that the bands are moving in. And then also within that, you then get 3 overarching narratives that are completely different, and I would say almost reflect David Mitchell writing in 3 different genres, which is something that he has shown to us before. However, they aren't very genre fiction because they aren't specific parts. They're kind of interwoven throughout the entire book. This makes a lot of sense because the 3 characters who are writing songs come from 3 very different musical backgrounds and therefore are writing 3 very different styles of songs, which creates the band to be a sort of fusion band, which becomes hard for the industry to define, which sort of proves to be the obstacle at the start of the book perhaps. So the characters' storylines kind of definitely reflect that also by telling stories that would generally fit into a different genre to each other. However, because they come together, the book in a way becomes genre-less, and I think a lot of people are probably going to feel that it then just becomes commercial, which I don't think is really doing justice to what the book actually does and to what Mitchell is fully doing. But that's my opinion. That's at least the experience that I had with it. I really had no interest in Dean Moss's story. It just was too much. I think for me it was just too masculine. It was a type of fiction that I have 0 interest in. I don't really care about this kind of male centric storyline, and it was it was very realistic, and it was very British in that it was gritty and it was dealing with sort of violence and lots of other things, which I just don't have any interest about because I would rather read about alternative experiences, I guess. So then Elf's storyline I really liked because it had a much more feminine feel, or perhaps it had, or perhaps the examination of sexuality was something that I felt I could enjoy at least more. And also with Jasper, because it had that Mitchellian sci-fi / fantasy / magical realist feel to it, his storyline was probably my most interesting. I do also feel like perhaps Levin, the manager, and Griff, the drummer, when they had their 1 chapters, Levin's in particularly was one of the best chapters of the book and something that I really wish we'd got more of. So in some ways, those 2 characters felt like they had fallen off the wayside just because of the design of the novel and couldn't fit into them. And I imagine that Mitchell probably fretted and wondered what he could do about that, because obviously when you're writing you want to do things, but at the end of the day you have to craft a book that works under the way that the book needs to work, and perhaps those 2 characters falling on the wayside was the only way that this book could be what it is. So I can appreciate that, but that is probably the biggest reason why I could never give this book a full 5 stars. However, when I read this book, for the whole thing I thought, this is just a solid 4-star read. There are parts of it that I'm not really that interested in. I have no care for the music industry of this time. I don't really care for the time setting of it, and I didn't really go into this book thinking that I would like it so much because of that, following a band in a time and a music genre that I don't care about. However, the writing really kept me in and kept me wanting more, and I think the way that it switched the perspectives made you sort of fall into a really nice pace in which at the end of each chapter you wanted to read the next perspective, because sometimes it would reflect on what had just happened, or it would give you insights into an event that had happened previously that the characters had just sort of reacted to but you didn't understand why. So this sort of clever pacing really kept me involved in the book, and having Jasper's storyline and Levin's brilliant chapter and Elf's storyline really allowed me to enjoy an alternative side of the book to the main themes that perhaps I wasn't so interested in. And in some ways I think that's a really good sign of what Mitchell has done in this book, and I think he's done it in all of his other books. I would argue at least he has done it in all his other books, in which he kind of writes something for everyone, so that lots of different tastes can pick up things that they really enjoy from the book. I feel like the risk that Mitchell has is that where he caters for kind of so many different reading tastes in one book, he then kind of caters for nobody at all. And I think, you have to sort of dedicate yourself to his books. And in fairness, I can appreciate why people might not want to do that. I understand that. But I do personally feel like for me, the dedication that I put into his books creates a much bigger payoff at the end of the book. So when I finished this book and I had my little cry over the way it ended up giving it 4.5 stars because it wasn't quite 5 stars because there were parts of the book that I didn't really enjoy. However, I think the payoff at the end that I got really substantiated the time that I spent reading it. And I didn't spend all that long reading it, despite its size. I got through it really quickly, and I think that's a testament to the way Mitchell writes, and that he knows how to write, and he knows how to keep a reader keeping on reading. So his sentence structures are great, they're simple, but they pack a punch. They can be metaphorical, they can be a little bit weird and vague at times, but I think he balances that out with the straightforwardness that is also needed in literature. And I think another thing that I really liked about this book, and I think this is something that comes from every David Mitchell book, is that not only does the book sort of wrap itself up in an ending, but also not entirely wrap itself up. It sort of reflects and wraps up other books that Mitchell has written. So if you haven't read any of David Mitchell's books, all of his books are vastly different. They're all very different from each other, but they all happen within the same sort of Mitchell universe. Characters that you might see in one book tend to crop up in his other books, and for example in this book you get Jasper de Zoet, which is the descendant of Jacob de Zoet, and this book also actually ends up filling in parts of The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet in ways that I really appreciated, and now I kind of want to go back and read Jacob de Zoet because I hated that book at first, but now having read this book, I feel like I might have a completely different appreciation. So there's something about his works in which he not only wraps up the text that you're reading, yet leaves enough open for you to still be wanting more, but he also sort of joins it with his other works and kind of wraps them up or gives you a new perspective on those books that you hadn't had before. And I think that's what I love the most about Mitchell's work, is this sort of grand overarching idea, which is part, I guess, of his literary genius, in that he kind of does know what's happening elsewhere and around it in his little world, but also perhaps he doesn't know, and he's actually really good at just fleshing out stories in his later books as and when he feels that they're relevant. So yeah, I think overall I really enjoyed what this book did, much more so than I thought, and I'm really glad for that, because of course I have put David Mitchell on a pedestal, and I have disliked some of his books before, which has been painful, but mostly I do like his books, and so I'm glad this one is one that I do really value and do really like. So yes, good book, and I'm really glad that I have read it, and I'm really glad that the library got it in and I was first on the list to snag the copy. And yes, I kind of want to, take a trip back to my mum's house in the UK and pick up his other books once more and just immerse myself in his Mitchellian world once more, and rekindle that interest and the passion that he brings to his books, and I think that sparks in yourself as a reader. So that was a review. I think, I hope. I don't actually know. There's a part of me that has just blanked everything that I have said before. So hopefully this video works. We shall see. And I'll see you soon for another video. Bye bye.